In this module, we're going to talk specifically about the semantic twist, the decision to try and accomplish our ontological goals through a semantic reduction. So we'll begin by talking about how the semantic twist recasts theories as primarily linguistic in nature, so that if we can change the meaning of the terms, we can show the theories to be about the ontology that we want them to be about. We'll look at two examples of this. We'll look at Hempel, who used the logical empiricist framework to formulate a version of philosophical or logical behaviorism that relied on the verificationist criterion of meaning to claim that the meaning of mental terms was exhausted by the overt behavioral conditions for their verification. Mental terms then get analyzed into behavioral dispositions. The claim is made that these behavioral dispositions exhaust the meanings of these terms, and hence a semantic reduction accomplishes our ontological reduction. We'll then look at how this semantic twist works with philosophy of language instead of philosophy of science. Here we'll look at Ryle and his attempts to analyze mental terms in terms of behavioral dispositions by acting as a conceptual cartographer, mapping out the underlying logical topology of the constraints implicit in our knowledge that guide our verbal behaviors in our ordinary linguistic contexts. Let's begin by tacking towards Hempel now. So Hempel's article addresses two questions. Are psychological propositions meaningful? And is psychology on par with, perhaps even reducible to, physics? To answer this question, Hempel invokes the verifiability criterion of meaning. Like positivists of that time, he holds that the meaning of a proposition is the method of its verification. This is an overtly direct reference notion of meaning. I get the meaning of these terms precisely because my operationalizations explicitly tie those terms to their significations in the phenomenal world. All seeming statements that can't be cashed out in terms of their conditions for verification are deemed meaningless, and hence the question, are these terms meaningful or are they not? Hempel invokes this principle and answers in the affirmative, telling readers that the meaning of a statement is established by the conditions of its verification, and that all circumstances which verify this or any psychological statement are expressed by physical test sentences. In the interest of completeness of exposition, we should note a couple of other features of the verificationist criterion of meaning as wielded by the logical empiricists. They held that a priori statements, such as inference rules of deductive logic, are true by definition and hence aren't subject to the verificationist criterion of meaning to get their meaning, or they are meaningless. And there are obviously problems with this position. Importantly, people started asking, what is the status of the verificationist criterion of meaning? How does one cash out verifiability? How do we show that it is true or false? How do we test it? And of course, they didn't have a good answer for that, and so they fell back onto their statement about a priori statements. These are conventions, guidelines. These are the ways in which we structure our understanding. Thus, in Hempel's hands, philosophical behaviorism holds that insofar as our ordinary mental terms have meaning, their meaning is given by the conditions which would verify them, where conditions are understood in terms of the vocabulary of methodological behaviorism. Here the idea is that our folk theory of mind, insofar as it is meaningful at all, gets its meaning from the overt physical behavior that underlies our attributions of mentality. So, for instance, anxiety, insofar as it has any meaning, has its meaning exhausted by sentences such as subject exhibits increased galvanic skin response. Subject complains of anxiety. Subject exhibits restless movements. Subject cannot sleep during normal sleeping hours. Hempel goes on to tell readers that he thinks that his view has at least two desirable consequences that make it attractive. First, adopting the verificationist criteria of meaning with regard to folk psychological concepts allows one to construe psychology as being consistent with the unity of science hypothesis without supposing that it is fundamentally different from our ordinary conception of mentality. Indeed, he claims, and I'm quoting, "Our analysis has consequently established that a certain statement belonging to psychology has the same content as a statement belonging to physics, a result which is in direct contradiction to the thesis that there is an impassable gulf between the statements of psychology and the statements of physics." Second, if the meaning of our mental terms is exhausted by overt behavioral predictions that would verify them, we cannot fail to correctly apply them on the basis of that observed behavior, and hence there is no problem of other minds. He makes three additional points. Logical behaviorism does not deny the existence of mental properties or objects. That's a pseudo-question. Logical behaviorism is distinct from, but sympathetic to, methodological behaviorism, and logical behaviorism is not committed to detailed neurological specifications. The next lecture module will segue into discussing Ryle's version of philosophical behaviorism, and then we'll turn our attention to the criticisms of the view offered by Chisholm and Putnam.